this computer. Okay. And that is your official Maryland law notice that we're recording now. So we're doing Machar Monday. Maybe remember that we did something called Thinking Tuesday, which was originally Texts on Tuesday at the very beginning of the pandemic. That's like how long we've been doing something like this. And we've moved it to Monday because Tuesday turns out to be a pretty popular time. And then we're kind of changing things around a little bit to make it flexible, a little bit shorter, which makes things not necessarily easier for me, but certainly more manageable for everybody else. So this is our March 2025 Passover edition because we won't have another one of these until after Passover. So if we want to talk about Passover, now's the time. Um, and so I said that we'd be talking about our calendar and Passover's importance historically now, and time for Q&A, that kind of stuff. And a lot of this is really, we spend a decent amount of time with the calendar. And part of the reason we do that is there's information in that part of the discussion that then makes sense out of the um, what's what's an important holiday in the Jewish calendar and why Passover might be more or less important. It helps to know some other things about the calendar to make all of that make some sense. So we'll actually start with the calendar and then we'll move on. Um, so how many New Years are enough is kind of the question because there are a number of different New Years. But there's other pieces to the calendar that are important too. So if you've ever been told the Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar, it's wrong because it's not. The Islamic calendar is a lunar calendar. It follows the cycles of the moon to determine the months, and you lose time. So if you've ever kind of said, why is Ramadan twice in a year? That's why Ramadan is twice in a year, is the month that Ramadan falls in has some moves around because the entire lunar calendar moves around. There's 12 months in the year. You don't make any adjustments for what the sun does, and all of a sudden you have holidays that migrate all over the place. So that's why Ramadan moves. Um, a pure solar calendar is sort of the Gregorian or modernized Gregorian calendar, right? That we kind of don't really have month lengths that connect to any particular natural phenomenon. The whole goal is to have 12 months and know that it's going to come out to 365 and a quarter days, right? Because every solar year is actually 365 and one quarter days. Every 4 years, you need to add a leap day, right? In order to get the calendar to stay synced up with the sun. So rather than every year have 365 and one quarter days because clocks don't do that, we just kind of added a day every 4 years, which also happened to be US presidential election years. I'm sure that that was on purpose, but maybe it wasn't. Um, the Jewish calendar is a lunisolar calendar, so it does both. So months are based on the cycle of the moon, sort of. And then the calendar gets adjusted so that it's connected to the solar year. And that's really important for Jewish holidays because the traditional Jewish holidays of Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot are seasonal holidays, right? Passover is a spring holiday. Shavuot is a summer holiday. Sukkot is a fall holiday, and they stop making sense if you have Sukkot in January. That does not make any sense out of Sukkot, which is a rain holiday, and you want rain. So when does the rainy season start? That's when you want to be thinking about rain, and that is October-ish in the land of Israel. So the way you kind of adjust this lunisolar calendar as the Hebrew calendar works is you drop in leap months. So the month that is chosen to be the leap month is the month of Adar. Adar is the last month in the Jewish calendar. And I know you're going to say, well, wait, but Passover is not the New Year. So we'll get there. But what happens is you get an extra Adar every so often. And the big holiday in Adar is Purim. And so you have to figure out is there, when do we put Purim? Purim gets put in Adar too if you have a leap month. Um, it is roughly every 7 to 8 years out of any given block of 18 years that you get a leap month. That's not, it's not a completely accurate statement because I don't do the math on the calendar. It is very complicated. Most rabbis, to be quite honest, buy a book. There are books that are about this thick that are just calendar charts. You don't even put your appointments in it. It's like it's a book that's just a big calendar chart for the next 100 years or so. So somebody else figures it out, prints it, and we just kind of take your word for it because most of us did not get into the rabbi business because we were good at math. And so not so much with us figuring out things. Is the first of the month a new moon? Yes. So Kathy asked, is the first of the month a new moon? And it is. And you kind of puzzle over that for a second because how do you know it's the new moon? But we can see the new moon, right? Um, Now, what's interesting is what holidays come on the new moon and what holidays come at other times. So, which month comes first? Everybody says Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year, but that's not what the Torah seems to think. So, the Torah actually says in the book of Exodus, so Exodus 12, um, we are just after the story has kind of picks us up just after the last of the 10 plagues, right? The angel of death coming through and killing all the firstborn males. Um, so that's where we are. It's like this has happened. Pharaoh has said you can leave. And we then get commandments. And this is actually the first place we get a commandment, like in the Torah, period. You have Genesis where, you know, people are talking to a divinity and the divinity is saying go here, go there, but it's not a generalized commandment. And none of the stuff that's told to Moses and Aaron at the first 11 chapters of Exodus are commandments either. So Exodus 12:2 is the first general commandment to the Israelite people in the Torah. And it says, this month shall mark for you the beginning of the months, which is the month on which Passover falls. And it says, okay, on the 10th day of the month, you're going to set aside a lamb. Every family is going to set aside a lamb for use on the night of the 14th when we celebrate Passover by slaughtering the lamb and roasting it and eating it. And you can't leave any left over for the next day. It's got to be disposed of. Which month is that? Observe the month of spring. So the Torah calls this month Aviv. So if you wondered what the word Aviv means in Tel Aviv, Tel means spring, like a spring of water, and Aviv means spring, like the season. So it's a spring, only in English. So we're told, observe the month of spring and make a Passover offering. So where does that leave us? Because this is a month that's called the same thing as a season. So are the seasons also months? Is it 3 months long in the solar calendar? And it becomes really obvious as you look at the calendar and you read more about it that no, it's not really, um, it's not really that this is some 3 month long month or anything like that. It's just this is the beginning of the spring and the Hebrew calendar. So the first month is just called spring. It picks up the name Nisan later on. As we get kind of closer to the Babylonian exile, we start to get some new month names in. And then once the Babylonian exile happens, we really get new month names in. And the prior names of those months just stop being used. And everybody goes with these old Aramaic names. So we do this thing where we say Rosh Hashanah is the new year. The biblical calendar calls it the seventh month. So when you go look at the rules for Rosh Hashanah, which isn't called Rosh Hashanah in the Torah, it's called Yom Teruah, a day of alarm. When you go look at the day of alarm, it says this is the first, it says on the first day of the seventh month. Here's what you do: sound the shofar throughout the land. It actually doesn't say shofar, it just says sound an alarm. And then Yom Kippur is the 10th day of the seventh month. And then Sukkot is the 15th day of the seventh month. So Passover is definitely, for the Torah, the first month. There are definitely 12 months. And the Torah is not clear about how you make a solar adjustment. It just doesn't have that kind of information in it. So the question is, which month is the first month of the year? Which one of these comes first? Because there's 12 plus 1, right? There's a dar 1 and a dar 2. So we have to know that. And so the question is the first month in the spring or the fall? And the answer is, why don't we have both? Um, if I play this video, it's going to be a little girl saying, ¿Por qué no los dos? Because this is actually a Spanish language video. It's an ad for a taco restaurant, as it happens. But she's saying, why don't we have both? So why don't we have both? Or four? So this chunk of text is from the Mishnah. So the Torah, most reliable date that you could put on the Torah is the first chunks of it are probably ninth to 10th century BCE. It's finally formulated probably around the year 300, between 400 and 300 BCE. So that's when the Torah kind of, we're done putting the Torah together. Um, the Mishnah is 600 to 700 years after that. So it's 200 CE. And this is the first of the texts that we have from the rabbis. And they say there are 4 New Years. On the first of Nisan is the New Year for kings and pilgrimage holidays, and we'll talk about that. On the first of Elul is the New Year for livestock tithes, although because this is the rabbis, there are two rabbis who say you've got it on the wrong month. These two say it's the first day of Tishrei. The first day of Tishrei is the New Year for counting years and for release, so Shemitah and Jubilee. So the Jubilee years are every 50 years. Shemitah is every 7 and is where you get the you can't have a slave for more than 7 years. And when they say slave, they mean Israelite slave. Non-Israelite slaves can be held in perpetuity, but Israelite slaves are really more like indentured servants. And so Israelite slaves are subject to this release thing that happens every 7 years, and that every 7 years is marked on the first day of the month of Tishrei. And then it's also the New Year for planting and for vegetables. You have tithes, right? That's how the temple operates, is there are tithes. And the tithes don't really come in the form of money. They come in the form of food. You can send money, and that tends to be people who live outside the land of Israel would send money. The idea being the money then buys the food that's used at the temple. And then the last of the 4 New Years is on the first day of the month of Shvat, according to Beit Shammai. And in Beit Hillel say it's the 15th. So 15th day of the month of Shvat is Tu B'Shvat. So of these 4 New Years, first of Nisan, um, the first of Elul, the first of Tishrei, and the 15th, which is a little weird, but the 15th day of Shvat, each of these has a holiday of some kind sitting on them, or is close to one. So Nisan, that first day of spring, there's no holiday other than Rosh Chodesh, which Rosh Chodesh for Nisan was actually yesterday. Um, so we don't get a holiday until the 15th, and the one that we get is Passover. The first of Elul is this New Year for livestock tithes. It's not really a holiday per se. People didn't really celebrate it. It was the day on which they would kind of count up livestock, and that's how you determine the birth date for all of your livestock and their ages. You don't do a thing where you keep track of the individual birth dates in the biblical period. You just kind of go, on this date, everything turns 1 year older. So we get the first of Elul. We have this tithing thing, and in the modern period, we find that there are folks who are observing something called Rosh Hashanah la Behemot, the New Year of animals. Behemot really means livestock, but you will find that when people do Rosh Hashanah la Behemot in the modern period, they mean all animals. And so you'll have things where people bring their pets to the park and rabbis bless the pets, which we are not imbued with divine power. I don't really understand the whole blessing the pets thing, but okay. Um, I guess if I understood the blessing of the pets thing, I wouldn't be a humanistic rabbi. Um, so that's what you get on the first of Elul. And remember, these two rabbis disagree. We don't listen to them, essentially. The first of Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah, and then the 15th of Shvat, Tu B'Shvat. If the first day of the month is the new moon, and the 15th day of the month is the middle, what phase is the moon in on the 15th day of the month?
Isn't it full?
Yep. So the 15th is the full moon. So we do not have Jewish New Year on the new moon. We don't have Yom Kippur on the new moon. We have Sukkot on the new moon. We have Passover on the 15th day of Aviv, which is the 15th day of Nisan. So Passover is on the full moon. Shavuot is close to the full moon, but not exactly there. It's a few days after. And we're not even actually sure how you're supposed to calculate when Shavuot is supposed to happen because the Torah is not really clear. Um, so we know that Passover falls mid-month, bright moon. We know that Tu B'Shvat happens in the middle of the month, full moon. We know that Sukkot happens in the middle of the month, full moon. Shavuot is kind of close, actually. It's like the 20th day of its month rather than the 15th. But it's on the waning side, but the moon is still pretty bright. So it's worth thinking about, what does the moon look like? And what does that tell you about the relative importance of one holiday versus another? Like, why would you, if you know that your year starts on a new moon and you know that your month starts on a new moon and you know that you can count the new moon, why would you put holidays in the middle of the month?
I mean, if you want people to gather and it's lighter, it's a full moon, it's just easier for people to leave their home and gather at other places, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's easier for people to see where they're going at night, right? That's one part of it. The other part of it is we know you can calculate the new moon, but you can't always see the new moon. So rather than assume that everybody can see the new moon, if you put holidays on the full moon, it's really hard to make a mistake. Even if it's raining, it's really hard to make a mistake. You know it's the full moon because it's a full circle. We have no problem. We know when that is. So people who are not living in places where there's somebody who can functionally use a calendar, right? Because we just kind of think, oh, yes, calendar's normal, but that's advanced math 3,000 years ago. So, if you're living in the countryside, you probably don't have somebody who knows how the calendar really works and could identify new moon versus full moon versus, so you just kind of have these holidays on the full moon, and that works out okay for these agricultural holidays because Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur really only happen in the temple in the Torah. So you don't really worry about it. But for Passover, people go to the temple for the first day of Passover, and then they go home. And they might go to the temple for Sukkot, but then they go home. And so they're traveling, and it's easier to know when the holidays fall. Not everybody travels to the temple every time, and these so Sukkot and Passover in particular are holidays where the big observances happen at home. Like you don't hear people saying, "We're going to go to shul for the first night of Passover." People don't go to shul for the first night of Passover. They have a Seder at home. You don't hear, I mean, you do hear people say, "We're going to shul on Erev Sukkot, on the evening of Sukkot." People do that, but not a lot of people do that because the commandment for Sukkot in the world of the rabbis is you have to build a sukkah and you have to eat in your sukkah every day. And so you're in a rush to do that. So you're probably not leaving your house. If you're somebody who observes all of these laws, you're not really going to leave your house to go to the synagogue. You're doing this stuff at home. And even in the biblical period, this stuff happens at home. You go to the temple on the 14th of Nisan. They take care of this lamb for you. You cook the lamb, you eat the lamb, you go home. So people are not everybody's traveling and they have to observe these holidays. You're supposed to not eat leavened bread for 7 days. How do you even know, right? You've got to, if you're not going someplace, you need a sign. New moon's a pretty good sign. You don't really need to know when Yom Kippur is if you live in a village because Yom Kippur only happens at the temple and you don't actually have to go. It's not a pilgrimage holiday. It's kind of whoever's there, we do it. So we know these holidays fall largely in the middle of the month. We know that that's when the moon is the brightest, and it makes a lot of sense with agricultural holidays because it's okay, this is how we synchronize our lives. Passover is when you start planting, Sukkot is when you do your final harvest and hope for rain for the next year. So, why does any of that matter for Passover being important? That's a very valid question. Because it's the beginning of the months, and what does that mean? And where do the months come out of? And what do we, why is that the new year? So, the Torah's new year is Aviv or Nisan, and the rabbis' real new year is Tishrei. And the rabbis say that Nisan marks the year for kings and pilgrimage holidays, and that Tishrei is the new year for counting years, so the creation of the world, and for the Shemitah, this release stuff, and the Jubilee, and the vegetable tithes. And so each of these is doing something different in the Jewish calendar. Right? One of them is kind of counting the one of them is counting out the beginning of the world, and the other one is counting out the actual holiday schedule. So we have this word regalim. So I said I'd come back to it, and I called them pilgrimage holidays. Regalim comes from the word regel. Regel means foot or leg. There's um, Hebrew doesn't have one word that means foot and a separate one that means leg. There's a phrase that can mean foot, but if you see regel, you really don't know whether you're talking about feet or legs, unless you have some more context or clarity. The pilgrimage holidays are called legs because you go someplace. I mean, it's really just that prosaic, right? And it's somewhat clever, but it's prosaic. So the rabbis have this month that they say this is when the holiday cycle starts again. And when you look at, there are three different sets of calendar discussions in the Torah. There are like, on this day you do this holiday, on this day you do that holiday, and it goes through a calendar. And in each of them, The list starts with Passover. So the Torah is serious about when the new month, when the new year starts. And the rabbis are too. The rabbis have a problem, which is that people have gone into exile and they've lived places other than the land of Israel. And you go to places other than the land of Israel, and particularly Babylon and those empires, right? The Akkadians and then the Old Babylonians and the Neo-Babylonians and right, the Assyrians, right? There's this sequence of empires that all kind of come out of Iraq. And at some point, these societies develop two New Years. One is in the spring and one is in the fall. And the two New Years in those societies are doing different things. So you're stuck doing two New Years. I mean, you've gone into exile, you've gotten used to the calendar that you had in exile. You don't tend to give up the cultural stuff that you've gained, right? Culture more tends to accumulate than lose. And so it took really 40 years in exile for people to just get used to a Babylonian calendar with month names that are Babylonian words. They're Aramaic words. They're not Hebrew words. Nisan is not a Hebrew word. Tishrei is not a Hebrew word. That's not what these months were called. They just had numbers. And then eventually Aviv, we know what Aviv means, right? Because the Torah says Aviv is the first month of the year, and you kind of get names for these months, but you don't have them initially. And then when you do finally get them, and you get months with names like so the month after Tishrei is called Cheshvan. It's also called Mar Cheshvan. It's named after a Babylonian god. A bunch of these are named after Babylonian gods. Don't tell anybody I said so. But they're named after Babylonian gods. So we've got two different New Years for counting out time for people. So, we talked about the New Year for animals, and that's for the age of animals. Yeah, there's some tithing that goes along with that, but it's not a people holiday. Tu B'Shvat is not a people holiday as the rabbis understood it. We've made it into something of a people holiday, but that's really the product of Judaism encountering the modern environmental movement. People were not doing Tu B'Shvat Seders 100 years ago, except for the very limited group of people who were into Jewish mysticism and lived in the land of Israel. Those people did it, but nobody else was doing it. People were doing Passover and they were doing Sukkot and they were doing Rosh Hashanah. These are people holidays. So people have two different New Years, one for kings and pilgrimage holidays, and one for the world and their vegetables. When you run your entire building's economy on what people bring you for produce, when you get your taxes paid is a big deal. So there are two New Years that are only tax days, right? Judaism has three April 15ths, and one of them also happens to be Rosh Hashanah, essentially. So major pilgrimage holiday on each of those months that have a new year, and they happen on the new moon. Passover and Sukkot, these two holidays that happen on the 15th day of their respective months, the New Year months, are the only 7-day holidays. There are no other 7-day holidays in the biblical calendar. Hanukkah is 8 days. We'll talk about Hanukkah and why that's kind of a little bit of a different case. But no other holiday on the calendar is 7 days. 7 days in the land of Israel. The rabbis say 8 in the diaspora. There are five biblical holidays other than Shabbat, which no one is going to say, no one's going to sync their year to Shabbat because you'd have a new year every week. And then Rosh Chodesh, which is the new moon, which really just kind of you get an extra sacrifice, and that's really all that happens on the new moon. So you've got five holidays, any one of which could be your candidate for the most important Jewish holiday. They're the pilgrimage holidays. You've got Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. These are the ones that are so they are called the Shalosh Regalim. Shalosh is the Hebrew word for three. So Shalosh Regalim means the three pilgrimage holidays. Pilgrimage holidays are the ones where people walk around on their legs, and that's why they're Regalim. So you've got three pilgrimage holidays, two of which are 7 days or so and fall on the new moon, one of which is 1 or 2 days long and is a few days after the new moon in its month. And then you have the shul holidays. I'll explain why I call them shul holidays in a minute. So Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and they fall in the first half of their respective month, which happens to be the same month Sukkot is in. So the month of Tishrei, you get Rosh Hashanah on the 1st, you get Yom Kippur on the 10th, you get Sukkot on the 15th. The reason I call these big shul holidays, it's not because they only happen at big shuls, it's because these holidays don't make a ton of sense as major holidays if you don't have a synagogue or if you're not close to the temple. You're not going to travel by foot, however long it is, to get to Jerusalem for Rosh Hashanah or for Yom Kippur. If you live in the Galilee, you're not doing that. You will go to the temple for the pilgrimage holidays. You don't need to There are no commandments that are connected to being at the temple. The instructions for Rosh Hashanah and for Yom Kippur are in the Torah are for priests. So you don't have to worry about these. You don't work. They're called Shabbatot. They're called Shabbat Shabbaton, a big big Shabbat essentially. And you fast on Yom Kippur, but you don't have to go. If you live in Jerusalem, sure, you should go. You're right there. But otherwise, these aren't important until we have synagogues. And synagogues are functioning as a place to do the things that would replace the things that happen in the temple. And it is then that Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur start to become important for everyone in a big way. And I kind of wonder whether if we did not find ourselves as Jews in the midst of two religious civilizations, Christianity and Islam, if we didn't find ourselves in these two civilizations that put a premium on repentance and atonement, I'm not 100% sure Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur would be as big as they are. Because that's a thing that seeps into Jewish culture, this huge focus on we do penitence at this one time of year, and penitence is really, really, really important instead of the way the Torah understands it, which is it's this ongoing process. People do stuff, they get stuff wrong, they need to fix it. We don't wait until one day of the year to fix it. You fix it as you go. Um, would we spend as much energy on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur if we didn't live among a bunch of people who really care about repentance and atonement? I'm not sure. They become much less interesting if you think, well, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we're living among Buddhists. They're not so concerned about atonement and repentance in the same way. They're not worried about saving your soul right now, which is what's happening with Christianity and Islam. And so I'm not sure these holidays would be the big shul holidays. They might just be shul holidays. I don't know that they'd be so big without kind of the Christian Islamic background for them. So if you have these four holidays that are the most important ones, I think if you were to talk to the average Jewish person in the United States on the street and you were to ask them what the most important holiday of the year is, there's a really good chance that they're going to answer with Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur because that's the holiday. Those are the holidays on which the largest number of people walk into a synagogue. Most American Jewish life is not focused on the synagogue the way Christianity is focused on churches. So Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when we go out of our way to go to this other building, being these days when we go out of our way, start to take hold as the important holidays in the Jewish calendar, the major ones, the most important ones, the ones that we close schools for on a certain legal rationale. But you're not seeing Montgomery County schools shut down for Passover. They do shut down for Easter, but they don't shut down for Passover. It happens to be the case that Passover and Easter are pretty close to each other these days. Um, it used to be the case that Christians would look at the Jewish calendar and make sure that make sure that Easter didn't fall on Passover. Things change. So these are the big ticket holidays today. If you look at going to shul, if you look at what people actually do with their lives, which is a whole different way of measuring things, you might have Passover and Sukkot. So Passover, people have the Seder. Sukkot, people build sukkahs, although most people don't do that, right? They might go to a synagogue for Shabbat and do the lulav and the etrog then, but they're not going to, most people don't build a sukkah in their backyard or wherever. Um, in Israel, in apartment buildings, people build them on their balconies, which is only marginally halachically appropriate. So in the biblical period, there's really two choices. Passover or Sukkot. Shavuot's not very long. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur aren't that important for a large number of people. So now you've got legitimately a difficult decision to make in the biblical period. Which one's more important? They're each 7 to 8 days long. They each involve serious changes to the way you live. You can't eat leavened food. We don't necessarily associate beer with Jewish and Israelite culture, but they drank beer, not on Passover. So it's not just, okay, you don't have bread. There's a whole bunch of other food you don't eat because of how it ferments and what it's made with. So Passover does upend how people live, even 3,000 years ago. Sukkot upends how people live. You're going to go out in the field and you're going to live in these booths and you're going to do a rain dance. Let's be honest, right? Waving the lulav and the etrog is a rain dance. It's just what it is. It's harvest time. You're worried about rain coming back for next year. You rearrange your life for these two holidays because they are agricultural holidays. One's the start, one's the end of the agricultural season. You care about these holidays, you change your life. It's nice to hear a shofar, I guess, but were we not living in Christian or Islamic centered cultures, I'm not sure we would be going to the synagogue all the time to hear these horns. Like, that's not enough of a reason to go. I would argue that Passover wins, and there's a reason for it, and it has nothing to do with either of the holidays in and of themselves. The rationale for a whole lot of the commandments in the Torah is I brought you out of the land of Egypt. Therefore, honor the Sabbath day. I brought you out of the land of Egypt. Therefore, honor your father and your mother. I brought you out of the land of Egypt. Don't screw it up when you're in the land, or I'm going to kick you out. Because the big punishment in Deuteronomy is there's a way of reading Deuteronomy where it's really a story of You're going to screw up. I'm going to kick you out of the land. That's the big punishment. I'll let you come back when you're better people. Right? So that's essentially what you could understand Yahweh saying to the Israelites in Deuteronomy is you're gonna screw up. I know you're gonna screw up. Here's the punishment for when you screw up. Don't screw up, but if you do, I'm kicking you out and I'll bring you back. And the thing you never want to do in Deuteronomy is do anything that's like an Egyptian. That is like number one bad thing. So there are laws in Deuteronomy for what the king does. The king is not allowed to go back to Egypt to acquire more horses. So you're not allowed to go to war against Egypt in a way that sends you down to Egypt to wage your war. You don't go back. So many of the commandments are, I took you out of the land of Egypt. The big punishment is, I'm going to kick you out of the land of Israel and you'll be back in exile for a while. So Sukkot, you're not getting a lot of, hey, I give you rain. So honor Shabbat. I give you rain. So you're going to eat matzah. Losing rain is a punishment, but it's never a rationale. There's never an affirmative rationale of, I give you rain, therefore. Except I give you rain, therefore you have to celebrate Sukkot. That's really it. So effectively, what happens is the entire premise of the commandments, and that kind of means the premise of a lot of Judaism from the ancient period forward, rests on the Exodus. And Passover is the Exodus holiday. So multiple times in a day, you're essentially talking about Passover if you look at a traditional prayer book. There's lots and lots and lots of, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. There's lots of passages like that. That's a normal part of everybody's day. The only time a sukkah is mentioned is in one of the prayers that involves going to bed at night. It says, spread over us your tent of peace, your sukkot shalomecha. That's it. So in a really traditional setting, Passover is the holiday. Sukkot's important, but Passover is the holiday. If you look at what Jews do today, 62% of all US Jews either held or attended a Seder. 61% went to a bar bat mitzvah or something like that, or lit a yahrzeit candle, right? Slightly smaller. The next one is Yom Kippur, and it's 46%. So not even half of American Jews who show up in the Pew Research Center surveys, not even half of them are going on Yom Kippur, which if you stop them on the street, they'd probably say is the most important holiday of the year. Only 20% attend synagogue at least monthly. Only 17% keep kosher at home, which, by the way, means that there are a decent number of Orthodox people who don't keep kosher because that number doesn't work otherwise. Passover is still, if you look at people's lived lives, the most important Jewish holiday. It's not Yom Kippur. It's not Rosh Hashanah. It's obviously not Sukkot. Sukkot doesn't make this list at all. It's Passover. The only holiday that arguably is more important is Hanukkah. So if you look at this graph, net Jewish, every Jew in the US, at least that got picked up by the survey and we're extrapolating out, they divide these results up by of Jews by religion and Jews of no religion. They're trying to find a way to recognize that there are cultural Jews. And when you look at it, okay, everybody seems to own a menorah, right? 90% of Jews by religion, 57% of Jews by no religion, but 81% of American Jews own a menorah. 64% have a mezuzah, 59% have a Hebrew language siddur. And you could imagine people who are Jews but not religious are going to own these things in much smaller proportions. And the same is true for Seder plates. So maybe Hanukkah is the most important holiday, but they didn't really ask, do you celebrate Hanukkah? They asked, do you have a menorah? They did ask, do you celebrate Passover? Do you celebrate Yom Kippur? Do you celebrate Rosh Hashanah? So I think probably Passover is still the number one holiday in terms of importance of holidays to most US Jews. That'd be my guess. Not the one that they say is the most important, but the one that functionally is the most important is still Passover. They even look, grocery stores try to play up Passover by selling challah, which I think is hilarious. But I mean, that's just grocery stores not understanding the holidays, but grocery stores understanding that cultural Jews go, oh, I'm going to buy more Jewish food. And so they put out challah for Passover, which, you can laugh about, but there are people who go, I should get a challah. Passover is coming. That's fine. People do that. But really, Passover is kind of the thing that the largest number of people redo their lives for still. It's not Yom Kippur, even though the guys in the mitzvah mobile, if they ask, are probably told, oh, yeah, Yom Kippur is the most important holiday. But it's obviously not. People obviously don't do it. Even 50% of them don't do Yom Kippur. They do Passover, though. So, Kathy, I saw your, you were unmuted at one point.
Yeah, it wasn't. I was going to ask you to scroll it up so we could see the rest of it,
Oh,
but
yeah,
it passed.
I took screenshots.
Yeah,
So
that's
there's,
okay.
but this
Jews
is,
of no religion would be kind of like us, right? I
yeah.
mean, is that
So,
secular Jews?
so they don't break them out as secular Jews. They're trying to get at something else. One, they're trying to get at people who are secular Jews who would say I'm a cultural Jew. Um, the other thing that they're trying to get at is the Pew Research Center has an agenda here that's actually pretty interesting when you stop and think about it. They're trying to figure out how many Jews there are, which is hard to do because, I mean, we can guess that about 20% of the American Jewish population, 20 to 30% of the American Jewish population belongs to a synagogue. That's a guess. Nobody really knows, but it seems to hold true when you do, local population studies. That's what you seem to get. What they're actually trying to do is the Jews who say, I'm not religious, and they are also including in this people who have one Jewish parent, which is, if you stop and think about it, the Pew Research Center saying we count as Jews people that Jewish law doesn't count as Jews. It's not people who have a Jewish mother that they're counting. It's people who have one Jewish parent. They're calling those people Jewish. And there is some indication in the survey data that they actually are also maybe thinking that people who just self-identify as Jewish without having any Jewish parentage, they're Jewish too, even if they didn't convert. So they're actually trying to broaden the pool of who's a Jew, which is how you're getting some of these Jews of no religion. Oh, yeah, my dad was Jewish. Gosh, I'm really glad you called, right? Because they're random calls to households wherever. And the first thing they do is they ask, are you Jewish? But they don't ask, are you Jewish? They ask about parentage and they ask about what you do and they try to get at an answer. So that's what's happening with Jews of no religion is that, sure, there's people, I'm going to come back to people like us, but people like us. And then there are all of these people who have one Jewish parent, but who have no other contact with the Jewish community and don't even think about it until the Pew Research Center calls them and says, do you have any Jewish parents? And they go, oh, actually, I do. I mean, we went to church growing up, but yeah, my dad was Jewish. I forgot about that. So that's what's going on in the background. And Pew, therefore, will tell you that there are more Jews in the United States than there are in Israel because Pew's count puts the Jewish population of the US closer to 10 million rather than 6, which is, if you were just going by the definitions of Jewish law, you get about 6 to 7 million Jews in the US and a slightly larger number in Israel. So Pew thinks there's actually a whole lot of Jews in the US. And that premise of the Pew survey is also what the Society for Humanistic Judaism uses when it talks about Jewish population. But I want to come back to Jews and no religion. That means us, right? So sometimes humanistic Jews will say, I am a cultural Jew, I'm not a religious Jew. Sometimes they will say, I'm a humanistic Jew, not a religious Jew. Or I'm an atheist Jew, or I'm a cultural Jew, or I'm a secular Jew. And nobody likes me at the Association of Humanistic Rabbis when I say this, but they all kind of know it's somehow probably right. I don't know. We run a regular school. We have Shabbat services. We do Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. We have a Passover Seder. The things we say and do in those contexts are related to our identity and are also related to what we think about big issues in the world and big issues in the giant scheme of the universe. That, in any religious studies classroom other than one at a Christian university, that is a religion. So, humanistic Jews define however they define, but humanistic Judaism definitely is a religion in terms of what it does, how it functions. Are there sacred texts? Well, they're not sacred, but they're central texts. I mean, I kind of had to fight another humanistic rabbi about teaching biblical texts in Senate and at humanistic congregations. And I say another humanistic rabbi, but this particular rabbi is not a humanistic rabbi. They just happen to be the rabbi at a humanistic congregation. And they, no, I don't want to, if I can avoid teaching a biblical text, I'm going to. And I can't imagine sending Machar kids out into the world after their B'nai mitzvahs with no exposure to anything in the Torah, because that's an ignorant person going out into the world. So it's not a sacred text, but it's an important text, right? So I think humanistic Judaism qualifies as a religion, which is does not mean that humanistic Jews are Jews by religion, right? Those are kind of two separate things. Um, one way of measuring this, I think, for real is if you check into a hospital, what do you say? Right? Because they ask you, what's your religion? Do you want somebody to come visit you? And they don't necessarily know what to do with you when you say atheist, but you can just say, don't have anybody visit. But if they say, what religious affiliation are you? And you put down Jewish, you've kind of said something about you, even if you're not trying to say, you say, I don't want anybody to pray for me, but you've still said something about you. That's kind of interesting when you stop and think about it. Because when you fill in one of these forms, the entire reason for that is it's going to the chaplain's office. That's why it's there. They're trying to figure out who to send up to your room if you need to talk to somebody, or whom to send up to your room if they need to administer last rites. You're making a religious choice in a really interesting way, which is to say, all of this is pretty complicated, but also humanistic Judaism is definitely a religion.